Well, a very good evening to everybody as you join this Kohima Educational Trust webinar. I'm delighted to have you all on board. We're going to wait a few moments whilst everyone joins. We've got people I can see popping in from all over the world. We've got well over 100 people registered for tonight, which is fantastic. This is an extraordinary story. I absolutely love Peter Lutken's book and the way in which his son and daughter, Emily and David, have presented it. And we're going to hear a little bit about Peter's life and experiences in Burma tonight. Well, I can see we've got some old favorites and regular stalwarts and supporters of the KT coming on board, which is extremely good. And I just the usual stuff. Stick your comments in the chat box, and any questions you've got, put them in the question Q&A, and we'll try and answer them at the end. Well, Emily will and David will. David said he can't be with us at the start of tonight because he's on the stage somewhere in Emily, I forget, somewhere in the States.
Vermont.
But he might. We're hoping that he's going to join us at the end of the towards the end of the session. So, am I ready to hand over to Sylvia now? Yes, it looks as though I am. So, Sylvia, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Rob. And hello, everybody, and welcome, as Rob says, to another Kohima Educational Trust webinar. It's always lovely to have so many of you along and so many regulars. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Emily and David Lutken, who are going to guide us through the remarkable stories from their father, Peter Lutken Jr. He was born and raised in Mississippi, and he joined the US Army in 1941, initially assigned to the Coast Artillery, and he was then sent to Assam to guard the airfields. He was soon reassigned to the British V-Force and later the American Office of Strategic Services, after he volunteered for reconnaissance missions behind Japanese lines. So what follows is a detailed and compelling account of his time in the V-Force and in the OSS, gathering intelligence and engaging in guerrilla operations in Japanese-occupied territory in that crucial China-Burma-India theatre. And it covers a period from 43 to 45. His book, 1,000 Places Left Behind, is based on hundreds of transcripts from tapes recorded later in his life and recounts the untold story, not just of one soldier's experience, but of that little-known history of British and American forces in Burma in World War II. And we're very fortunate to have his daughter with us tonight, Emily Lutken. Emily is not only the editor of 1,000 Places, but also an exceptional poet. Her poems have been published in anthologies and journals. She also was a family physician by training and worked for the majority of her career on the Navajo Nation. After retiring, she taught middle and high school science and maths in rural Colorado. What a varied and wide career, Emily. Welcome tonight.
Thank you.
Her brother David, as Rob has also just said, can't be with us tonight, although we're hoping when he comes off stage, he will join us. He's recorded the audio version of 1,000 Places, and he's an actor and musician, and he's performed on Broadway, at Ford's Theatre, the American Repertory Theatre, Carnegie Hall, and Lincoln Center, amongst others. There's a long list, and we're hoping very much that he can join us later. Rob's reminded you, and I'll say again, do use the chat button, put any questions you have on Q&A, and Emily and Rob will get to those at the end. As always, we're so fortunate to have Rob Lyman with us this evening to set the scene. Rob, I know, doesn't need an introduction as the author of many books on the Burma campaign, but I wanted to say, in case you haven't seen or subscribed to his Substack, The War Room, I highly recommend it. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over and get the evening underway. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Sylvia, again for that lovely introduction and a really warm welcome from me to everyone attending tonight's webinar. I likewise am delighted that Emily and David are with us tonight. I share that excitement because a couple of years ago, when this book was published in 2023, Bob Cook, who was then a trustee of the KT, sent me a note saying, Rob, you need to have a look at this. It's really exceptional. And I thought, another book, a book on the Burma campaign that's exceptional that I don't know. Wow, what an amazing story. You're going to hear about this guy tonight, Peter Lutken, but he had an extraordinary experience, both in V-Force. I'm not going to try not to let too much out of the bag at this stage, but also in the OSS in the Hawken Valley, fighting on behalf of the Northern Combat Area Command against the Japanese. It's really an amazing story. I would have loved to have met Peter Lutken because the humanity that comes out in this book is really quite extraordinary. And I think that's one of the great privileges of reading so many books of memoirs of men who served in Burma. Is such a privilege. One final thing I want to say before I hand over to Emily is that I give lectures regularly on the subject, public lectures, and I have to make a special effort to remind my British audiences that the Americans played a very significant role in the Burma campaign. And most Brits are rather surprised at this. And when I tell them that there were nearly 3 times as many Americans involved in Southeast Asia Command, they are always surprised, but that's the truth. And Peter Lutken was one of them. And on that note, Emily, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the story. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. It's sort of our mission, and I think similar to the Kohima Educational Trust, to keep this from being forgotten. And in America, maybe even more so than the UK, people are not very aware of Burma and the Americans in Burma, even though there were about 250 to 300,000 of Americans that served in what we call the CBI, but there were 2 million who served in the Pacific and 3 million who served in the European theater approximately. So there was a lot more, and not too many people know much about it. And even more forgotten, if you can be more forgotten, maybe, are the Kachin people, who were really key in my father's experience and probably the reason he survived. And I think it's maybe apropos of what Mountbatten was supposed to have said, that you can't be forgotten if no one's ever heard of you. I think that might be what people in the United States have not heard of the Kachins, and they should have. So this is a picture of my dad when he came back from the war. He had gotten the rank of major. And what we're going to do is talk about his, as Sylvia and Rob mentioned, we're going to talk about sort of his journey, and also about the Kachin's role in what happened in that area. So he was in the, as was mentioned already, well, let's start with this. Most of the pictures that I'm going to show are from his scrapbook. He had a scrapbook with, a few hundred pictures in it, some of which were given to him, some of which were Signal Corps Army pictures, and some of which he took himself because he was dropped a camera towards his last mission, and took a lot of the pictures himself. A lot of those are the ones that you'll see are out of focus because he was not a photographer. But at the same time, I went ahead and included them because they kind of show what's going on. So this is him before he left for the war. He'd never been out of the country. He had just graduated from college and had gotten his commission as a second lieutenant because he had been in the Reserve Officer Training Corps in college. And as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, then he was went to training and then was shipped overseas fairly quickly. As was mentioned also, his job was, he was with the Coast Artillery, and he was, I'm going to use this cursor here a little bit. He was stationed up in Assam in the northern part, where the Americans were flying the hump. They were flying to take supplies and ammunition over. I'm sure most of you know this, because China was blocked off by sea and by land, because as soon as the Burma Road was shut down, when the Japanese came through, there was no way for us to get supplies and ammunition to the Chinese. So they were flying this over. But perhaps more importantly for this talk, on the way back, they were flying recruits, raw Chinese recruits that were going to be trained down in this place called Ramgarh. So he was to guard this area. The only other thing I want to say about this map, which is a great map, is that it shows here area under Japanese control, which is the area that looks red. And you'll notice that the northern part of Burma is not covered as under Japanese control. And this is because the Kachins and other local tribes of people, including Nagas and some others who were had not sided with the Japanese, were fighting them. The reason they were fighting them is because they didn't get along too well with the Burmese, and the Burmese were allies of the Japanese. So this was happening. So when, so this is important to remember for the conversation, is that there were Japanese in the area, but they were not in control of what was going on. All right, so this is an example of some of the gun placements that he was, this is not him, but it's a picture of someone with a Lewis gun. They had bigger guns, but they were protecting the airfields in around this tea plantation place called Mokulbari. But when there was a call to teach the Chinese how to shoot some automatic weapons and things, he decided he would volunteer. And so he went to Ramgarh and trained Chinese. While he was there, about a few weeks he was there, and then they said, well, the Chinese are now going into Burma and you're the liaison officer. So he said, well, what about my patrol back in, my platoon back in Mokulbari? And they said, no, that's all right, now you're the liaison officer. So he accompanied the Chinese and helped to transfer them on a sort of an epic journey just to get to Lido. And then he went on a reconnaissance mission because he ran into somebody he knew who said, why don't you go up in the hills first and see if we can take pack animals? So he did that, but then he met the Chinese shortly after that. But first he had run into some of the Nagas and Kachins who had begun teaching him the language, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So here's another map, but I think it's important just to show that here's Lido, and the Northern Combat Area Command under Stilwell, which included the Chinese and the Americans. Their job was going to be to kind of build a road from Lido through Michinau down through Bamo and to connect with the Burma Road, the Lido Road. And so they were going to try to move through and build this road and get rid of the Japanese along the way. The Chinese that he went with were stationed at this little place here, Pibu, which is an abandoned village. And this is the first part. This map is sort of the first part of his stint inside. And later we'll go to the second map when he moves on down. So he was with the Chinese and he began to get nervous himself just because they were not doing much scouting. They were just sitting there, essentially. And so he began to talk to the local people and get together a group and train them a little bit in how to use some more modern arms. Some of them had like muzzle loaders and things. And so he trained people, he got them some extra arms that the Chinese had, and he made himself a little group of scouts. This picture is interesting. These are Nagas sitting behind the Chinese watching them eat. So this is an example of one of the Naga headmen's house. He spent the night there a few times and started to learn how to speak the language better. They taught him Kachin, even though they were Nagas, because they all spoke both languages, and they knew that he was going into the area where there'd be more Kachins. These are some of the Nagas that he saw. This fellow over here on the right with two hats on, they called two hats. He was the head man of one of the nearby places near one of the air warning stations. This fellow Phillips with him, it was in an air warning station, KC-8. So Pete made forays out into the jungle with his group and found out information, and several times ran into V-Force. And in specific, he ran into this gentleman on the right, Colonel J.R. Wilson, who was promoted right around that time to command that part of the V-Force out of a village called Tagapga. So after he met Wilson about 2 or 3 times, he received notice that he was being transferred to the V-Force. And I'm sure it's because Wilson saw this fellow who could already speak Kachin pretty well and was getting along with the people and was trying to find out information on his own. So he was transferred to V-Force, which was sort of a motley crew. There were the fellow in the center is an American sergeant, Casey Magan, and the people around there, I think there's some Gurkhas there and some Kachins. And there were also this fellow on the left is his right-hand man that J.R. Wilson set him up with, Makala, who's a really good soldier and a Kachin. And the fellow on the right, Dr. Abdul Halim Bandi, was a doctor in the Indian Army, and he was there the whole time my dad was in V-Force. And he and my dad maintained a friendship throughout their lives. When they were 90 years old, they still were talking to each other. They had come and visited each other in India, and he came to the States, and he was just a wonderful fellow and a good friend to my dad. As was Makala, who unfortunately didn't live too long after the war, but he did survive through the war. So in V-Force, what their job was really was just to gather intelligence, but also to do things like supply guides. He supplied guides for the Chinese and also for Merrill's Marauders at when they went to a place called Walla Boom. So they did that too. They didn't really try to engage the enemy at all. They just wanted to find out information. And but he had a lot of great adventures. It's very, some of them in the book you'll see quite wild, where he went on rafting trips. His stomping ground was sort of the Hukong Valley, and the rivers that went through, he decided at one point, well, we're just going to hop on this river and go down and get information as we go down. So it was kind of wild and unique. So he was in V-Force, as I mentioned, for over a year. This fellow up here, Martin Threlkill, was a good friend of his. He is shown here, as he would put it, dealing drugs, because they paid people in rupees, but occasionally they'd have opium addicts, and they paid them in opium. So here in this picture, he's measuring out the amount of opium to give people. In the lower corner is a picture I thought you might enjoy. It's a picture of another American, Johnny Colling, who is with some Naga porters. These are women porters, and Pete said that they were the best porters of all because they were cheery, and they laughed a lot, and they would make fun of the Americans and the British who were slip sliding on the trails. They were just a joy to be around, and of course they liked it because they got paid. So they used women porters a lot at this time. Later, when he was with the OSS, they didn't really. They got resupplied by these small airplanes. They didn't have drops usually with things like C-47s or something. They used just to drop, for instance, they'd drop food, or they'd drop the silver rupees to pay them. in these small planes. And sometimes they land small planes to evacuate people they landed on these sandbars on the rivers because they couldn't land in the jungle unless there was an airstrip built, which when they were gathering intelligence, they usually didn't have a lot of time to do that. So this is Pete before he went in from Lido on the left and after he'd been in the jungle for a few months. And he lost a little weight, he got a little grungy, but I think he was doing all right. Now, they were in V-Force only until I mentioned April of 44. And as we know, and the Kohima people know, in April of 44, the British were pretty busy. And so I think what happened was Dr. Lyman can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think basically they took the V-Force people out of the north and they put all of the people, the Americans who had been in V-Force into the OSS at that time. The OSS was already in operation. He had met people from the OSS, but he was transferred to the OSS, and I think Colonel Piers even came down to an airstrip and talked to people about it. Mountbatten also came and met with J.R. Wilson, and this is a picture of that meeting. He got his eye injured they were riding a Jeep through the jungle or something. But I thought that you might enjoy that as an interesting picture. So Pete was then transferred to the OSS, where he spent another more than a year. Now, the first part of the time he was in the OSS, he was still in this area. He was in the area east of the Chinwin and north of the railroad that took the supplies to the Japanese who were in Michinau. So he was in this area trying to find out what was going on. In the OSS, he experienced a little bit of what they call mission creep, I think, which was in addition to gathering intelligence, they were ordered to make some trouble. So he gathered a whole new group of Kachens. And I didn't mention earlier that wherever he went, he gathered people from the villages and asked some of the older people if they would come with him as advisors. He always kept with him a group of what he called Salangni advisors, and they traveled with him only if they wanted to, and of course they were being paid, but they were eager pretty much. And so he surrounded himself with people that knew the area, and he would always ask, do you think we should do this? We should try to have attack this village, this outpost or whatever. He would kind of run it by them. So he was in this area. He spent some time down by the railroad, and at this point they began blowing up railroad tracks and rail cars and bridges, and also raiding the Japanese and getting herds of elephants and oxen to carry things. They would go down at night and release them all and then gather them up later. And so he spent a bit of time through the summer in this area. This is where the Chindits were at one point, because he said he went to a campsite on Indoji where he thought the British had been camped there for a while, and speculated that it might have been the place where they were evacuated with those Sunderland airplanes. So then the Japanese were moving south, and the Americans and Chinese, with some help from the British Air Force, I think, had taken Michinau. So he was moved then. He went to Michinau, and then he was flown to south of Bamo here. So let me see if I've got a picture of that. There's a picture of them blowing up a railroad car. He had what he called an I&R platoon that did that. Okay, here's some maps, and I know the one on the right is kind of busy, but I thought I would explain a little bit about it. So he was dropped here in Nam Khai because that's where Makala was from. And he thought they would be able to start recruiting there because his orders were to recruit a battalion of men and then go through and cause trouble for the Japanese. And the Japanese were situated in Nam Tu down here. That was their big headquarters in this area. But they were all around here. So he was dropped behind enemy lines. So they went to the village that Makala was from, thinking they would recruit there, but there were Japanese in it. So they left and went on south. And as they went, they recruited people. They tried to cut lines like telegraph lines and things like that, and anything else they could do of damage. But basically, he was just recruiting people. And he ended up at this place called Pangnang Boom, where he successfully recruited about 1,000 people to be in his battalion. Now, on this side, the reason I included this is to show where the Chinese, the British, and the Indian armies were when he was doing this. So this is the route that I just showed you. This is where he started his battalion. He got them supplied on January 1st, 1945. So you can see here that the Chinese were coming in around January 15th here. The British were coming in here around February 11th. Indian divisions were coming in around the 15th of January also. And they're all trying to converge on this area because they want to open up the Burma Road. So this is where he is for the rest of his time, basically. Here he is gathering some people, sort of a crew of various people. Some Indians who were in the area, who had been working in the mines, the Baudouin mines next to Nam Tu, volunteered to be in the battalion as well. And they all got up and had a huge airdrop on top of a mountain. They thought this would be really great because there were clouds all around, and so the Japanese probably couldn't see where they were having the drop because they were way up high on a mountain. And here is his battalion. I know these are not great pictures for a webinar, but you can kind of see there's lots of men and there's these three in a row are who all is in the battalion. This is pretty big. These are some of the sections: the hospital group, the supply group. The headquarters section were like radio people, translators, and liaison people. And then the animal transport people were local Chinese, not Chinese from the Chinese army, but there were local Chinese in that area. And so they had access to some horses and mules. And then they had training. So they had to train all these people. And it was really quite an amazing event, apparently. They had all these people gathering up. They had appointed someone to dispense the weaponry and to assign people to groups. If they'd had any experience, then they made them, you know, a little bit higher in the command thing. You know, I don't know all the British command, the Subadars or Havadars or those people. And they just said, you're this, you're that, you know, because you know this. And it must have been quite an amazing thing because just in a few days, they had gotten together companies and they had gotten people trained in how to shoot the weapons and how to throw the hand grenades and how to, you know, shoot the mortars and bazookas and everything. Just a few days of concentrated effort. And then they took off. And this is, I thought you might find this interesting. This young fellow is not, I mean, he's carrying a rifle, but he's not a soldier. They had lots of younger people who wanted to come and whose fathers or uncles were in the army, and they just wanted to come. And he wouldn't let them, there was no way to tell how old they were because there was no birth certificate, there was no identification. So his method, he told us, was they had to be able to hold the rifle by the grip straight out and hold it there while he counted And if they could make it to so many seconds, I can't remember how long it was, maybe 30, you know, he had to count slowly. If they could make it, then they could be in the Army. Otherwise, they couldn't. But they could be kitchen boys, or they could crank the handle of the radio generator. So they carried the weapons sometimes for them because they were used to things like that, but they weren't allowed to fight. These are some of them hiking along. Okay, so now we're going to hear David read. I'm going to show you a little bit to set the stage, but he'll, if I can get this up here, he'll start to. There we go. So they walked from this place down through towards Long Talk. And on the way, they tried to have attacks on outposts. And this one is an attack on this place called Mangai. And this happened in February, I think. So let me start, see how this recording works. You'll let me know if it doesn't work.
Part 4, Chapter 39, Attack on an Outpost. Our spies determined that near where we were headed at a village called Mangai, a Palau village, there was an outpost of maybe 100 Japanese. Our trail went right between 2 outposts at Mangai and Namshan that were on a road to the Japanese base at Nam Tu. We decided to go all the way from Hongwi to Long Talk in one day. We got a very early start, but the whole column was around 2 miles long, and as we moved, the line stretched out longer and longer. 1,000 men and 250 horses take up a lot of space. Furthermore, we were getting into territory where the jungle was not as dense, and there were open spots on the trail. We arrived at Long Talk right at sundown. The Japanese were bound to know, though, or would find out very quickly that we had passed the junction, and they'd know it both at Namshan and Mangai. So I elected to attack Mangai the next morning. The men were worn out from hard marching all day long. For me to ask them to keep going for another 10 miles or so in the dark was a lot. I took only D Company, Richardson and his folks. I left everybody else at Long Talk. The head man there told us that there was a trail that led through a canyon about 1,000 feet down back up the other side to Mangai. It was a waxing gibbous moon. So for the first part of the night, we had good light, but the terrain was steep and we struggled getting down into the canyon and up the other side. When we made it up to the ridge, it was a little past midnight. At that time, the moon was beginning to set, and then it got really dark. The trail was right up on top of a narrow hogback ridge, very steep on both sides. We had the 1 company, about 150 Kachins in 3 platoons. According to our information, there were approximately 100 Japanese, enough for substantial resistance, but we were counting on surprise. We didn't intend to capture or hold anything. As awful as it sounds, we just hoped to kill as many of the enemy as we could and then get back to Long Talk and continue our journey south. As we made our way, there was no conversation, just quiet, with the occasional clink of canteens. I was a quarter of the way back in the column. Wesley Richardson was on the tail end. As we were clinking along, all of a sudden there was a great rumpus up front with lots of shouts and the noise of something crashing through the bushes. The whole front end of the column panicked and began running back down the trail towards me, but nobody was shooting. Well, I managed to grab a hold of 1 Kachin running by and said, Palo-E, what is it? He said, Jain, meaning Japanese. He tore loose from me and kept running. All these men came streaming past and I couldn't stop them. As the last one came running by, I laid down in the grass. I had a good view up onto the trail. In the starlight, I lay there for a while, wondering what in the Sam Hill I was going to do since my fearless soldiers had run away. Directly, I heard somebody coming at a slower pace. I hid in the grass as this figure walked toward me. When he got near, I could tell by his hat, a big Gurkha-style hat with a brim, that he was one of us. Well, I called him by name, and he jumped. He was the Jemadar. I asked him what the devil is going on. And he said, "You won't believe this, but the point man ran into a water buffalo smack dab in the middle of the trail. Well, it had charged into the bushes and he panicked. He didn't really know what it was, so he turned and ran into the next guy, and that man ran, and eventually the whole damn front end of the column ran." He said, "I tried to stop him, but I couldn't." And here we were on the way to attack the Japanese at Mangai, and we had been routed by a water buffalo. Well, we had some signals that we had taught the men, whistles imitating a bird. So the two of us walked down the trail and called and began to find the men one at a time. They were all chagrined. Everything was perfectly quiet, nothing going on except our whistling now. It took us well over an hour to get them rounded up. They were pretty ashamed of themselves, but we got them back on the track, all of them. And we marched on down to a great big banyan tree, and I made them all sit down and made a speech. "You men have lived around water buffaloes all your life. You've ridden on their backs. You've herded them with sticks. I can't think of anybody who's more familiar with water buffalo than you are. And yet you ran in a panic when one of them made a big noise. You're not acting like soldiers, but you got a chance to redeem your reputation. Now, this is what happens from here on out. I want you men to just kick the hell out of the Japanese when we get to Mangai. Remember what you're supposed to do. Let's form up right quick. Got to get going." But by that time, it was beginning to hint at daylight. But we were close, so we continued on. Shortly, we came to the brow of the ridge and looked down on the village. The Palaung houses looked just like Kachin houses. We had a good view of the village and could see the knot of a hill past it where the Japanese were. In the wintertime there, like here, the leaves are off the deciduous trees, so we could see pretty well. We had originally planned to set up the mortar above the village and fire it at the Japanese camp as the signal to start the attack. We planned that one platoon would go straight down the trail. I would take one platoon and go around the right flank, and the third platoon would go around the left, north of the track. But when we got there, the north side was so dadgum steep that it was obvious we were not going to be able to go there. So we decided to send two platoons down the main track and mine around the flank. We got the mortar set up for a clear shot. I told Richardson, "When I give you the signal, you pound the hell out of the Japanese camp. Just shoot up all your ammunition as fast as you can." We had carried about 25 rounds for the mortar, so he got ready. But about that time, not more than 75 yards in front of us on the track, two Japanese soldiers walked out of the trees, slinging their rifles over their shoulders. They were coming out of a campsite right close by. And we had been talking, not loud, but without knowing they were there. The patrol that was supposed to go down the track was already in position. But instead, here came two Japanese, so they opened fire immediately. They killed those two right off the bat. That started the whole thing. The Japanese at the nearby campsite there came out like they were coming out of a hornet's nest. There were probably close to a dozen, an outpost to defend against people like us. Well, too bad for them, because our folks were there and mopped up on them very quickly. Those that we didn't hit turned and ran down the trail toward the Japanese camp. Well, I gave the high sign to Richardson, and he opened up full blast with the mortar toward the camp. I immediately took my platoon, and we banked off to the right. The others charged straight down the trail. My group raced as fast as we could, but we were slipping and sliding on pine needles and grasping trees as we tried to make time on the downside of the steep ridge. Now, why it happened, I don't know. But all of a sudden, some houses in the village caught fire. First one, and then a couple more. I don't think the mortar hit the village. I really don't understand to this good day how it caught fire. Anyway, it did. And it was just like Gotterdammerung, with tower and flames and smoke and black billows rolling up into the sky. All the houses in the village didn't catch, but those two or three were completely consumed. I was hoping whoever was in them got out. Folks were certainly awake by that time and scattering like quail. Our men on the main trail continued on through, firing at the Japanese who were running right ahead of them. More Japanese come fogging out of their main camp, running down the trail beyond. Well, it all took about 20 minutes, running as fast as we could. Richardson had shot all his ammunition and followed behind the first group. The houses were still burning in the village, but by the time we got there, we all met up at the Japanese camp. The shelters were empty. We counted, and including those in the initial assault, 16 Japanese had been killed. There was a lot of blood, indicating others had been hurt. We sent a part of a platoon in pursuit down the trail to try to catch up with them. As I said, the count was 16, including the men that came out of the woods at first. They were still right there in the trail where they had fallen. Didn't even get to fire a shot. We ourselves had only one man wounded. We searched the woods for villagers to try to tell them to come on back. Most of the houses were still intact. However, we weren't able to contact the headman of that village until the following day. And we had to explain a lot, since we were at least indirectly responsible for those houses having burned down. But none of the villagers was seriously injured.
Well, they finally worked.
Extraordinary story.
David, I see you're here.
Here I am.
It was interesting to me that a lot of the stories he told were of things that went awry. And you got the impression sometimes reading the book that everything went awry. But what I think had happened was that these were the things he remembered. You know, when something went well, he didn't talk about it really. But if there was something interesting, like there's one story he'd tell where they charged up a hill and there was no one there, you know, or where they fired off those, what are those mortar things that have little parachutes with a light, flares or something so you can see?
Yes, illumination rounds from a mortar.
Right. Well, they fired them, so they thought they were going to fire them over the Japanese, but they end up firing them behind themselves, so they were silhouetted by them. So this kind of thing he would tell as a story because it made an impression on him. At any rate, he told a lot of things like that, and this is one of those where the water buffalo scared everybody. But they conducted several more successful ambushes and attacks on outposts after that. But they began to be coming out of Kachin territory. They were in Shan states. And also the war was sort of winding down. So at this time, in late April, it was all of the battalions, and there was like 8 or 9, David, battalions of OSS who were there. And so they were all pretty much all disbanded at this point, and they made a new battalion of some soldiers who wanted to keep on, some of the Gurkhas and some of the Kachins who were more, had more training. And they made the 10th battalion that followed the Japanese on out. But at this point, they were, the war was over for them, basically. And so they marched back to Nam Tu, where the Japanese had been headquartered. And at that point, they had a great celebration. And people came down from the hills, and they had all their fancy regalia, and they had dancing, they had feasts. And this thing in the lower right-hand corner, they drank something called Lao Ku, which is some kind of rice beer or something. And you can see the people in the lower right-hand corner with their very ceremonial dance costumes, really pretty remarkable. They also had Bu Yam Gam, who was one of the 3 of his main advisors. He had 3, Dashi Ya and Gumzao Singh, I think, were the 3, and he read the saga of the 7th Battalion, which is this long saga of what they did. And then there's a great picture over here of a Jingpa Kachin soldier doing a sword dance I thought were interesting. They gave medals to some of the brave soldiers. You can see the height difference here. My dad was about 6'1", and the average Kachin was maybe 5 feet or a little bit taller. Not that there were some taller folks. You can see this fellow over here is pretty tall, but most of them were not. And here are pictures. I like this picture because the fellow who's getting paid here at the end, when they paid their everybody their final pay, was carrying his sword, which most of the Kachin soldiers had swords that they carried with them. And on the right, you can see what we used to call the Three Musketeers. My dad had a picture of Makala and Ting Baum in his office for his whole life. And, so this is the sort of final get together of not the whole battalion, of course, but many of the 7th Battalion of OSS Detachment 101. And at this point, I'll say we thought he was, we always thought he would write a book, and we kept thinking he would, and he never did. And then we thought, well, when he retires, he'll write a book. But he didn't. What he did when he retired was get together with the other veterans of Detachment 101, and here a bunch of them are, and who decided that they owed the Kachins, what they called it, a debt of honor. And so they began to try to plan to do things to help in whatever way they could, because things in Burma have not been going well for quite a long time. So they did several things. The first thing they did was translate a book, a medical book, where there is no doctor, and they had it distributed in Kachin State. And then some people worked on brick and mortar schools, but my dad and several of his good friends worked on a project for crop exchange to have farms. So they went over and talked to the Kachins and started this, what they call Project Old Soldier. And they were able to get some money from the Drug Enforcement Administration and from they themselves. And they hired a manager who was an agricultural specialist, the woman in the right, far right, Nangja Lapai, who's just a fantastic person. And she managed the program, which they ran for over 20 years, from the mid to late 90s through 2016 or 17. And during that time, I showed these pictures because I wanted you to see that they were in Kutkai, but they also were in Nam Tu, what this picture shows, where Pete was with his battalion. So they started lots of farms. Eventually they had maybe 5,000 farms. They grew corn, buckwheat, fish farms. And here they are. This is Nangja in this picture in the far left, and my dad walking down the road to see some farms. You can see they supplied seed and fertilizer and some agricultural expertise from the United States universities went over, fellow from Texas A&M. And they also had some feasts and award ceremonies, and some of the old veterans soldiers came, and it was a wonderful experience, I think, certainly for my dad, and good to try to feel like you're doing something for the Kachins. But so he didn't write his book. So David had the brilliant idea, which everyone should do, I think, who knows anybody with a good story. He sat my dad down with a tape recorder, taped tons of stories. My dad had maps of Burma, and he would trace his course and tell stories when he got to different villages, what happened. Places where he ran into smallpox, or places where he had confrontations with tigers, all sorts of things, and told all his stories. And so we had that manuscript typed up, and then when I retired, he and I worked on it for a couple of years until he died, and then I continued to work on it. And here's the last slide here, and I thought maybe David could read the dedication and the poem. You can see that his Kachin name was Kaangzao Lai, which I think means he who has been through it all from the beginning to the end. David?
Hello, everybody. I'm from White River Junction, Vermont. And I'll do my best. I don't have the right accent, but I will give it a try. Dedicated to the Kachin. The days lay out, the morning sun beneath your at brim as you sight. The dinner rush from noon till 1, and the full roar that lasts till night. And the poor dead that looked so old and was so young an hour ago, and legs tied down before they're cold. These are the things which make you know. Also, time running into years, 1,000 places left behind, and men from both two hemispheres discussing things of every kind, so much more near than I had known, so much more great than I had guessed.
Well, that was unbelievable. I'm absolutely stunned at how brilliant that was, both Emily and David. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for quite an extraordinary presentation about your remarkable man, your remarkable father. I'm so disappointed that I've interviewed and met many hundreds of veterans of the Burma campaign, and I really wish I'd met your remarkable father. Well, let's just quickly say a few things. There have been there's a number of questions that I will answer here, and a number of lovely comments in the chat. Thank you very much indeed. A couple of questions. The first question from Robert Albright, as Emily pointed out, the primary purpose of V-Force was reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Like her father, my father was transferred from V-Force to another unit in April 1944 after Kohima. And the question is, was V-Force effectively wound up once its primary role became redundant? No, it wasn't, Robert. It kept on going, but in a much smaller state. Many men of V-Force ended up fighting all the way to the end of the war in Burma as part of SOE. Many of them were transferred into Peacock Force, P-Force, and we'll hear about that in due course, and fought with the Karen, actually, in March and April 1945. Second question from Bill Twist. Emily, a remarkable tale. I agree entirely. And so well told and documented. Thank you. Was your father approached in the 1960s to discuss / advise for the campaign in Vietnam and Laos?
Well, he had a lot of strong opinions about Vietnam. He tried to make them known, but no, he wasn't. They didn't pay attention to him. I do remember he sent letters to senators and whatnot, especially he would say things like Agent Orange is a horrible idea because you need to have the jungle is your friend. You need to use it, not so things like that. So he had a lot of ideas about Vietnam. But David, do you have anything else about that?
No, but I agree certainly that he had a lot of opinions about it and the way that the war went over there. And as it always, to him, you remember, it always came down to language. And he wanted everybody to learn to speak Vietnamese, I think, so that they would know what was going on.
Fabulous. And there's some lovely chat. I'll just read a couple of them. Well, the first thing is I'm delighted to welcome Caroline Alexander to the chat tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, Caroline. Caroline, by the way, is the author of Skies of Thunder, one of the most remarkable books I've read in recent years. It's the story of the hump airlift. And Caroline, stand by because we're going to get you on the webinar in due course. Some very nice comments from everyone. Thank you very much indeed. Everyone's very supportive of tonight. A little comment from Bill Twist. Again, remarkable tactical ideas and improvisation from someone trained in the ROTC and coastal artillery. Just imagine, your father going through ROTC and coastal artillery and ending up in Kachin territory speaking Jingpo and leading Jingpo soldiers. It's really quite an extraordinary and crazy story. And very interesting, there's a little comment from our lovely friend Liz Lockhart-Muir. Love the poem. I was at Bateman's yesterday, Kipling's Home. Great presentation. So thank you very much indeed. Sylvia, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I think there was also, we have a guest tonight for Kachin.
Yes.
Emily.
Yes.
Did you see that come up in the chat? So maybe I'll
have
put you
seen
in
it.
touch afterwards.
Oh, that'd be great.
It's quite extraordinary. Let me just read it. His name is Guntung Lashi. And Guntang, thank you very much for joining us. And he says, "Good evening, all. I'm one of the Kachin men who met and worked with Peter Lutken
Wow.
in Burma.
That
But
is
now I
just
live in
brilliant.
the UK. What an extraordinary story." So we're going to put Guntang in touch with you.
That's great.
Absolutely amazing, Emily. And the photographs, we've just thoroughly enjoyed the incredible photographs. And we were just saying, my husband and I, that you don't see that level of photographs very often that were taken. And the fact he had a camera dropped off to him is obviously something to do with that. So a last plug on the book, which Rob managed to get in the interim, and well done, Emily, for recovering. Halfway
Sorry.
through.
Yeah.
Better man than I. Yes, so we just wanted a reminder that the 1,000 Places Left Behind is available as a Kindle on your Kindle, or more recently as an audio book, which, having heard David read some of it, I think is the way to go with this book. If you're not going to buy a hard copy, I think to hear David read it and had us all in stitches with the water buffalo, not to be missed. But if you'd like a copy of the book itself, KT do have some copies available. You can get them from us or from your normal book supplier. I'll also have some copies in York for those of you coming, which, speaking of which, there is still time to book your tickets for York, and we'll be holding a commemoration service in Dean's Park, followed by lunch at Imphal Barracks, which it's always a wonderful occasion, and everyone is welcome. And this year, we're in for a treat on the evening prior to the service. I think there's some slides, Emily, if you
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was kind of lost there. Yes.
That's all right.
Here we go. So
There
here's
you
the
go.
service. Yes.
And this year we're in for a treat the evening before the service, when Richard Duckett will be hosting an evening at York University. We're gutted that Rob can't be there this year because we've had to move the service by a week and it clashes with Chalk Valley. So we're gutted not to have Rob, but other people at Chalk Valley will be enjoying him instead. But Richard Duckett, who Rob introduced us to, has stepped into his enormous shoes and hosting for us at York University. He'll be guiding us through the campaign, which will interspersing the historian's account with memories from veterans, inspired by the fantastic response we've had to our Book of Remembrance. Descendants of those veterans will be reading from their relatives' accounts of their wartime experiences, very much like we've heard tonight. If you haven't secured your place yet, please do book now, and I promise you canapes and wine will be included.
Wow.
I just wanted to tell you that we haven't talked much on our webinars about the new KET project of overseas Naga bursaries, but I'm delighted to tell you and wanted to share with you that we have awarded our first 2 KET bursaries to young Nagas living in the UK. Both are medical students and both are descendants of a veteran at Kohima. So we look forward to being able to share their progress with you over the coming months. Our next webinar will be on July 24th, when Lieutenant Colonel Mike Tickner will present The Savage Wars of Peace, the aftermath of VJ Day, which we hope again will bring a different perspective on this 80th anniversary year. So we look forward very much to seeing you all then, or hopefully before that, in York. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Emily and David and Rob. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.